I really enjoyed the Judenhood.
Okay. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you to Torah Anytime for helping disseminate these lectures each year. We are taught in the Talmud that the Torah is really not 5 books of Chumash, which is both and Mikra and the Lord. It's really 7 books. Because the Chumash Bamidbar is divided into 3 sections. In the Torah itself, literally the scroll, that division is completely recognizable because by even Aaron at Pasuk and the Menucha Yomar are encompassed in what we call parentheses, backwards new, that highlights that this is different than the rest of the text. So therefore you have a Chumash Bamidbar until Vayibim Aaron. Then you have a Chumash Bamidbar of Vayibim Aaron and Menucha Yomar. And then you have the third part of Bamidbar from there to the end. There is a great idea that lies behind always the interpretations of Chazal are at many different levels. And sometimes, therefore, it's difficult to comprehend them all. Why is it split? What's the split here? If, for instance, we were the editors of the Torah Shemiksa, of the Torah, we would perhaps make the split somewhere else. There will be a split, let's say, before the Exodus from Egypt. After the Exodus, a different level of communication. Or there are other places that, if we're splitting, we could split. What idea lies behind the fact that we're going to take this Chumash and divide it into 7 sections instead of 1? So there are many approaches to this subject, but the one I want to use this morning, I find fascinating. And it says that the Chumash is basically divided between the period of time before the Jewish people created the golden calf, the Egel Azor, and the rest of the Chumash is post Egel Azor, after the golden calf had been built and worshipped, and that entire scenario took place. And they base it on the fact that when Moshe prayed to heaven that the Jewish people should be forgiven and not be destroyed because of the sin of the golden calf. So in heaven they allowed him that there never would be a complete retribution. But they told him, the old Pokti Pokadi, on the day that I come to collect for other sins or other troubles, I will also add to the bill a piece of the Egel Azor. So that in all of the events that we read in the Chumash and the Tanakh, there's always a piece of the Egel Azor that is there. And that therefore the dividing line in Jewish history, in the Chumash, is the incident of the Egel Azor. So you'll ask why doesn't it say by Egel Azor, by even Soa, and Nucha Yoma, why does the Torah wait until Bamidbar to introduce us to those two psukim which are a chumash by themselves? So that's the Machlokas Rashi and the Ramban on whether Ein Mukdam Mukdam by Torah or not. And the Torah bound telling us not a rule. Rashi holds Ein Mukdam Mukdam by Torah. There's no chronology in the Torah. So therefore, things that happened hundreds of years before are written now, because the Torah is not bound by time. And the Ramban says no, that even though the Chazal do introduce us to such a concept, is that the Torah is not bound by that. The Torah is perfect chronology. And therefore, this split happened later, didn't happen at the time of the Egel Azor. So based on that, so the entire idea is also subject to different interpretations. Now, the idea that Ein Mukdam Mukdam Torah that Rashi follows allows a great latitude in interpretation. Why? Because I'm not bound by time. So in chronological order. So things that happen, so to speak, first, don't have to be listed as first, which really allows for a great deal of latitude in interpreting the Torah. This goes to the heart of the matter. I know I'm digressing a little, but I'm sure you're following. Is time a creation? Or is time an absolute? This was discussed by the Greek philosophers. Discussed by Aristotle especially. But it's discussed by all of the great Meforshim in Tanakh as well. The view of the world until our century was that time was an absolute. That the Ribono Shel Olam, so to speak, in creation is also bound by time. Time is one of the raw materials in which creation can occur and be built. We find already in Medrash that the Jewish view was that time is not an absolute. Time itself is a creation. which again will allow us a much greater latitude in dealing with the problems of how old the earth is and how are we to understand everything that goes on. I mean, it's such a complicated universe you can't imagine. There's a new telescope called the James Webb telescope, named after the head of the astronaut program, James Webb. I guess it's an honor to have a telescope named after you. That is far superior to the Hubble telescope, which until now has existed in space. Now, the Hubble telescope is one of the wonders of technology. And it allows human beings on Earth to peer into the universe, so to speak, to go back who knows how long. Because light from distant stars, etc. So there's such a thing as a light year, right? It takes a long time. So that much of what we see now, when you look at the stars, in terms of time, that light that we see now is left that star thousands of years ago. And so now they have this new telescope, because the Hubble telescope doesn't have the power to peer through, let's say, the black holes that exist in space, etc. Now they've got, this thing is the wonder of wonders. So they turn it on. So when they had the Hubble telescope, there was a space in space that was completely black. Couldn't figure out what it was. Some said it was a black hole. There was a star there that collapsed, and the gravity. All of this is so mind-boggling, you know, that it's hard for the human mind to encompass it. Hard for us to understand what universe we live in. With the new telescope, they look at this black space and they see it's not black. And they see that there are at least 10,000 galaxies that exist in this black space. But it is so far from us that the light hasn't reached us yet. So to speak, you can see Maaser Bereshis. That's what we say in davening. Macharish betula b'chol yom tovim Maaser Bereshis. The world is created every day. We're seeing now creation. That was the theory of the Big Bang. All of the astronomical theories that exist are based on the fact that we're going back in time. So what about time? It's artificial. We say that light goes 186,000 miles per second. We invented that number. Time itself is creation. There's no absolute in it. So until the 19th century, if you held like that, then it was anathema to be able to say that. All the scientists said you were wrong. There's a famous piece in the Tosfos Reed, Rabbi Shaya de Trani. Trani is an Italian city in the boot of Italy, and the heel of the boot. There was a time that it was a great Jewish community. Today there was nothing there anymore. And there's a famous family, the Tranis. named after the fact that they came from that Italian community. So Rabbi Trani, the great Rishon, was a disciple of Rabbeinu Tam, of the Balei Tesis, traveled from Italy to France, the yeshiva of Rabbeinu Tam. Someday I hope we'll give a lecture, what did the yeshiva look like before they were yeshivas? That you also need to tell us. Sure that the yeshiva champagne didn't look like fun no one of the issues of that tradition. Anyway, so Shai Trani was had a lot to do with astronomy and with non-Jewish scientists in his time in the 11th and 12th century. So in the Masechah Shabbos, he discusses the debate that he had with these non-Jewish astronomers, which was part of the church then. And the non-Jewish astronomers claim that time is absolute. And that, so to speak, the Lord also has to operate within the confines of time. And Shai Trani said that that is blasphemy. The Lord has no constraints. And therefore we have to say that time itself, as we judge it, is a creation. So just like there's a creation of an apple tree, or there's a creation of a lion, or the creation of human beings, there's a creation called time, by which we measure chronological events. But it's not an absolute. The Rabbi Shalom is a Hoya Ove V'Yiyeh. The Taisus read says, God is omnipresent. It's not God was yesterday and he's today and he's going to be tomorrow. It's not like God, there is no yesterday and there is no present and there is no tomorrow. Again, it's not an easy concept for human beings to wrap their mind about, especially if you want to buy a Rolex. He maintained that time was an absolute, was not an absolute, while the non-Jewish philosophers. And our second question they disagreed with is Rabbi Tam's famous opinion that there are two sunsets, two shkiot. That's how we come that people wait 72 minutes. So 72 minutes after the first shkia, but then there's a second shkia, which is the real shkia. So they said, what is Rabbi Tam talking about? Apparently, it was very commonly known, the opinion of Rabbi Tam. You know, the old joke about the non-Jewish caretaker in the synagogue. And somebody asked him, you know, what time is Havdalah, Saturday night? And he said, I don't know. But I do know they're always waiting for somebody named Rabbi Tam, but he never shows up. So Rabbi Tam said there's a shkia when the sun sets from the horizon. In other words, when we're looking at the horizon, okay, let's say shkia today is 8:08. From at 8:08 in the city of Jerusalem, the sliver of the sun is gone below the horizon. But he said that's not the real shkia. he has to wait 72 minutes. We'll discuss in a minute how we come to 72. So he says, he puts it in a strange way, Rabbi Thomas, and takes it to Shabbos. He says, like the sun goes to sleep. So the non-Jewish philosopher said to the Tesis Reed, what do you mean the sun goes to sleep? What is it? Is a child playing? We know the sun doesn't go to sleep. They also were aware that all of Judaism is based on the fact that the earth is round, not flat. Which again, in the Middle Ages was heresy to say. Woke always came in different forms. And you can never say against the established opinion, no matter how wrong it is. So I mean, so the Tesis Reed answered them, he writes. Rabbi Tom was a holy man, he said. So he didn't want to talk in the language of the non-Jews. He didn't want to talk in scientific language. So his language was that of heaven. So when he says it goes to sleep, that's a heavenly description of what happened. He's not talking science. But that since he's such a holy man, he doesn't talk the way you talk. He said, I'm talking to you, you know, I'm not that holy, but he is. The Marishal holds that Rabbi Tam is the equal of the Rambam. So he's a holy man, so he speaks in these terms. But he said, I'll explain it to you so you'll understand. What does he mean there are two sunsets? So he says, the earth is round. There is a theory proven over and over again called the refraction of light. In other words, light bounces against, let's say, a wall. Part of the light bounces up so that you're able to see the light that hit the wall. You're able to see it 15 feet above where it hit the wall. And because the light has been bent, that's the refraction of light. So he said, the first Shkia is when the sun is no longer visible. The second Shkia is when the angle of refraction is so great that you can no longer see the refracted light of the sun. And he said, the Gemara seems to think that that takes 4 times what the Gemara calls 3/4 of a mile, which we define as 18 minutes. So therefore, that's why it's 72 minutes, because that's the maximum angle of refraction of light. That's the Shkia. So according to this discussion, it's obvious that both Rabbi Tam and Tesis Reed held that time is a creation. It's not an absolute. Because otherwise you can't have a theory of refraction. Now, because of that time is a creation. So Einstein came along at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. And he proved that light is not an absolute. And that time is not an absolute. Because by bending it, you make it closer. By bending it the other way, you make it farther. So he was able to prove by physics that time is not an absolute, time is relative. Which is an enormous contribution to understanding the Torah, if we think about it. So because time is relative, it's a creation. Because if it's a creation, God does not operate within it. It's above time. So there is this concept. And therefore Rashi can say, they moved on the Mucher about Torah. In the Torah, there is no chronological rule for time. Because time is a creation. And that has been the basis for a great deal of Jewish philosophical thought until today. So when we look at the ego, we look at the sin of the golden calf. So the emotion will be on property locality. On the day that I come to punish them for whatever they are doing, I take a piece of the ego with me. What does that mean? That means that the ego is with us eternally. It's always here. So there are sins that can be forgiven. Sometimes if they're forgiven, the slate is wiped clean. They don't exist anymore. But the ego was a sin of such magnitude that it was never forgiven. It's omnipresent. It's also Hoya Hoveh. It was, and it's always here, and it will be here. And therefore it's collective. The Ramshon collect all. And on that basis, therefore, the Torah is to be divided into these different sections. There's a Torah before the ego. That's the Machlekes Rashi and the Ramban. Whether the building of the Mishkan was before the ego, or whether it was after the ego as a kapora for the ego. Again, the basis of that Machlekes is how do we look at time? So in the Torah, in this Parsha, we see a few incidents that to us do not appear major. There's the incident, Yisro goes home, Gesundheit, your father and all left. Take him to the plane, goodbye. Torah makes a big deal on it. And Moshe says, "Oh Lord, please don't go away. We need you." Give me a crack that will doom the generation of the desert. Then they're hungry. They want a variety of meals. Human beings are. We are so adjusted that we have to have taste and substance, etc. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. You can use all the nutrients you want in a pill or in an infusion, but that's not going to satisfy. So they complain. We only have the month. Okay, it's a sin, but it's not the child says to his mother many times, I don't like this. famous joke about the child that he was already 5 years old and hadn't spoken a word. Parents had tried everything and they were beside themselves. And one day the boy is sitting at the kitchen table and she gives him a bowl of porridge to eat. And he says to her, "It's too hot." She's overjoyed. Calls up her husband at work and said, "Johnny spoke today." And when she comes down, she says to Johnny, "Why didn't you ever say anything until now?" He says, "Until now, everything was fine." So they don't like the mud. There's such a great sin. And a plague that bursts out, more people die from this than died from the ego. And then we're going to have countless other stories that are going to follow. You're going to have the spies. No, it's something that the spies got it wrong, right? The CIA is wrong. So what? What's the big deal? That whole generation is going to be this. And Aaron and Miriam speak against Moshe. Look at something. Why should she become a leper? If you look at all the incidents in the Chumash Bamidbar, it's death by 1,000 cuts. Each one by itself is not such a big deal. And yet it's the destruction of that generation. Because in every cut there is the ego. And the ego is what weighs against the Jewish people. It's not the immediate sin, so to speak. And that's part of the idea of timelessness. The ego is always here. I didn't think an ego, I never saw it. Things that happen to the Jewish people now also happen because of the ego. And this insight is what Chazal used when they discussed the fact that the Torah is divided into 3 sections. There's a pre-ego Chumash, there's the ego itself, and there's a post-ego Chumash. And because of the post-ego Chumash, then all of these things take on a gravity that otherwise perhaps they would not have had. And this doesn't answer the problem, but it does give it an insight. Is that many times we see that the punishment is greater than the crime. Why does God do that? No matter how sinful the Jewish people were, go explain the Shoah. Because there was a Zionist movement, 1.5 million Jewish children had to be destroyed. Well, all our das doesn't make any sense. So apparently the ego tips the scale in all of these matters. And the Chazal, in order to make that clear to us, pointed out that there are different divisions in the Chumash. And that one of the dividing lines, if not it is the dividing line, is the ego of itself. What went on before, what went on during, and what went on afterwards. And I think that that is a great insight into perplexing things that we read about and that the Forsham attempt to discuss with us. And this is a way to think about things. It's psychological telescope that allows us to see things in a different light. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Right.
Sure. Good to see you back.
Yes.
Whatever it is, gave you